A man runs through a train station with his coat half buttoned and his heart beating like a warning bell. The train he needs is already waiting. The doors are open. The schedule says he still has time. Then his bag tears. Papers scatter across the floor, strangers step around him, and by the time he gathers everything, the train is gone. He curses the delay as evidence that life is against him. What he does not see is the intersection he would have crossed 20 minutes later, the collision he would have met, the conversation he would have missed, the timing that had to be broken so a different alignment could occur. A delay is not always a denial. Sometimes time itself steps in front of you because you cannot yet see what it is blocking. There is a belief buried inside almost every person who has ever felt the sting of waiting. It is not a belief they chose consciously. It was installed through repetition, through culture, through the relentless message that speed equals success and delay equals failure. The belief sounds like this: if it were meant to happen, it would have happened already. That belief is the source of tremendous suffering. It turns every postponement into a verdict. Every missed window becomes evidence of unworthiness. Every rescheduled meeting, every approval that takes longer than expected, every relationship that does not open on command becomes a signal that something is fundamentally wrong with your path, your effort, or your life. But consider what this belief actually assumes. It assumes that time is neutral. It assumes that the universe operates like a vending machine. Insert effort, receive outcome, on schedule. It assumes that your personal timeline is the only intelligent timeline in operation. And it assumes that anything outside of that personal schedule is a malfunction. These are not small assumptions. These are foundational errors in the way most people read reality. You were taught to worship efficiency. You were conditioned to equate productivity with worth. The faster you move, the more you accomplish, the closer you stay to your plan, the more you believe you are doing it right. Delay interrupts this formula and feels like sabotage. But what if delay is not sabotage? What if it is a different kind of intelligence operating at a level your personal timeline cannot see? Think about how an immune system works. It does not explain itself. It does not ask permission. When something approaches the body that the body cannot safely absorb, the system responds before the mind understands why. The result from the outside looks like obstruction. From the inside, it is protection. Reality operates with a similar invisible architecture. There are timing mechanisms beneath the surface of events that most people never see because they are too focused on what they wanted to arrive to notice what the delay prevented, redirected, or preserved. The delay is not always the story. The delay is often the editor. This codex is concerned with breaking a particular false belief that has cost countless people their peace, their trust, and their spiritual discernment. The belief that a delay is punishment, that waiting is weakness, that rerouting is failure. Each of these interpretations emerges from the same root error, confusing your map for the territory. Your map is your plan, your desire, your expected timeline. The territory is the living, moving, interconnected field of reality that contains forces, other people, unresolved patterns, timing alignments, and invisible coordinates that your personal map cannot account for. When the territory diverges from the map, most people curse the territory. The wiser response is to ask what the territory knows that the map does not. There's a more ancient interpretation of time that certain traditions preserved quietly, the kind of interpretation that does not trend easily, but carries far more truth than the productivity worship of modern culture. In this interpretation, time is not simply a container for events. Time is an active participant. Timing is not neutral. Arrival has intelligence built into it, and so does delay. This does not mean that every delay is comfortable. It does not mean that waiting is always passive, and it does not mean that you should accept every obstruction without discernment. The teachings inside this codex will make those distinctions carefully. But before the discernment can begin, the false belief must be addressed at its root. The false belief says, "I was delayed because something went wrong." The deeper truth says, "You were delayed because something had to be right before you could safely arrive." Those are entirely different experiences of the same moment. One produces resentment, the other produces receptivity. One closes you down, the other opens you up to information that the delay is carrying. When you stop interpreting a delay as a personal failure and begin interpreting it as a timing correction, you do not become passive, you become literate. You become capable of reading a dimension of reality that most people never access because they are too busy fighting the very mechanism that is trying to protect them. This is what will be decoded inside this codex, not inspiration, not comfort, not empty reassurance that everything will be fine. What will be decoded here is a mechanism, a real operating system woven into the architecture of time itself, one that most people live inside their entire lives without ever learning to read. In the first section of this journey, you were introduced to the core rupture, the false belief that delay equals failure. You are already beginning to understand that this interpretation, while common, is one of the least accurate frameworks for reading what happens when time breaks from your expectations. In the section that follows, you will be introduced to the law beneath the delay. This is the hidden metaphysical mechanism that governs the intelligence of timing. You will see why time does not always cooperate with your schedule, and why that non-cooperation is not random. You will begin to understand what this codex calls the divine detour, a rerouting that is not accidental but structural, not punishing but protective. From there, you will move into the section on why most people misread delays. This is where the codex becomes a diagnostic tool. You will recognize the internal signatures of impatience, control addiction, and timeline worship that cause intelligent timing signals to be experienced as personal attacks. Understanding the misreading is the beginning of understanding the signal. The codex will then open a collection of examples, concrete, emotionally recognizable moments of delay drawn from travel, relationships, finances, career, healing, and spiritual development. These are not abstract theories. These are patterns that most people have already lived but never had the language to decode. Following that, the codex enters the diagnostic mirror, where you will learn to map how delay patterns appear in your own life. You will learn to distinguish which delays carry protection and which carry invitation. You will encounter the question of what your relationship to delay reveals about your deepest assumptions about reality, control, and trust. Then, the Codex offers its most precise section, the Divine Detour Protocol. This is not a vague practice, it is a method, a specific sequence of steps that transforms your relationship to delay from reactive suffering into conscious discernment. This is where the teaching becomes a tool. Before the closing, you will receive a section on the most dangerous mistakes that corrupt this teaching and an advanced application of the divine detour principle across the deepest areas of life, including relationships, money, spiritual timing, and major transitions. Finally, the codex will return to where it began, to the train station, to the torn bag, to the papers on the floor. But by the time you return, the image will mean something entirely different to you. That is the architecture of this codex, not a lecture, an initiation. If this language feels familiar, if you have stood in a station watching doors close and wondered whether the universe had something to say in that silence, then this library was already waiting for you. Subscribe to the third library. There are more codices inside this archive, and each one opens a door that most people walk past without ever knowing it was there. There is a law that governs timing that has no popular name, no trending hashtag, no viral summary. It has existed beneath the surface of recorded metaphysical thought for centuries, embedded in the margins of philosophical traditions that understood time as a living field rather than a passive backdrop. For the purposes of this codex, it will be called the law of synchronization, and it is the mechanism that makes the divine detour possible. The law of synchronization holds that events, people, conditions, and arrivals must align across multiple dimensions before a true and stable convergence can occur. Your personal timeline is only one thread in this convergence. There are other threads. There are the internal states of other people involved. There are environmental conditions that must be precisely arranged. There are internal conditions within you that must be ready to receive what is arriving. And there are symbolic alignments, threshold moments, and invisible calibrations that operate beyond what any single person can schedule. When you force an arrival before the synchronization is complete, you do not simply get what you wanted early. You get an incomplete version of it, an unstable version, a version that arrives without its full support structure in place. Reality is not withholding the outcome from you. Reality is assembling the full architecture of the outcome, including the parts you cannot see, before delivering it. Consider a cathedral under construction. From the street, it may look unfinished, obstructed, even abandoned. Scaffolding blocks the facade, tarps cover the windows, the entrance is sealed. A passerby who does not understand the process might conclude that the cathedral will never open. But the builders know that the sealed doors are not a permanent condition. They are the final stage of preparation before a stable opening becomes possible. Most people experience delay like the passerby. They see obstruction and conclude abandonment. They do not see the interior scaffolding being removed, the floor being finished, the lighting being calibrated. They only see that the doors are not yet open, and they interpret that as a sign that the doors will never open. The law of synchronization does not operate on your emotional urgency. It operates on completion, and completion has its own intelligence about what order things must arrive in, what must be finished before the next layer can be added, and what must be cleared before a stable structure can hold. Now consider the way weather systems coordinate. A storm does not arrive because it simply decided to arrive at that moment. A storm arrives because a precise convergence of pressure, moisture, temperature, and atmospheric conditions has reached a threshold. The storm is the result of an invisible coordination that preceded it. No single element of that coordination is the storm. The storm is what happens when all of them meet at the right threshold. Your breakthrough, your relationship, your financial arrival, your creative flowering, your healing, your recognition, these are storms of a different kind. They are outcomes waiting for a convergence of invisible conditions to reach their threshold. The delay is often the period during which those conditions are still assembling themselves. The divine detour is what happens when your chosen route would have intercepted that assembly process too early, before the conditions reached their threshold, before the convergence was stable. The detour does not cancel the destination. It preserves the integrity of the arrival. Understanding this law requires a fundamental shift in your relationship to time. Most people relate to time as a measuring device. They count days and weeks and months, and they determine whether they are ahead or behind based on a personal schedule they created in a moment of desire. But time is not a measuring device. Time is a coordination field. It does not measure distance between you and your desire. It coordinates the invisible assembly of everything that desire requires to arrive intact. This distinction changes everything. If time is a measuring device and you are behind schedule, the appropriate response is to push harder, move faster, eliminate obstacles. But if time is a coordination field and a delay appears, the appropriate response is different. The appropriate response is to ask what is being coordinated that has not yet completed, to ask what the delay is holding space for, to become curious rather than resistant. The ancient metaphysicians who understood this law described time using a word that has no direct modern equivalent. They described time as an active intelligence that perceives and responds. Not a god with a face and a name, but an active intelligence built into the fabric of events, capable of something that looks from the outside exactly like protection. This is what makes delay uncomfortable for the modern mind. The modern mind was trained to believe that intelligence requires a face, a voice, and an explanation. Protection must come with a reason that can be verified immediately. Guidance must be visible. But the intelligence woven into timing does not explain itself in real time. It reveals itself in retrospect. It is only after the train is gone that you understand why you needed to miss it. The question that this law asks of you is this: can you trust an intelligence that does not explain itself? Can you remain in relationship with a protective mechanism that reveals its purpose only after the protection has already occurred? This is one of the deepest spiritual questions woven into the experience of delay. There is another dimension of this law that is rarely discussed. Not only does delay protect you from what you are not ready for, it also protects other people and systems from your premature arrival. You have not only been arriving into your life, you have been arriving into other lives, other systems, other alignments. And sometimes your arrival before the full synchronization is complete would disrupt not only your own trajectory, but the trajectories of others who are part of the larger convergence. The person you are meant to meet needed more time in their own process before they could fully receive your presence. The organization you are meant to join needed more time to reach the internal state that would allow your contribution to have its full effect. The financial system you are meant to participate in needed more time to clear its preceding structure before it could sustain what you are building. Delay, in this understanding, is not a personal judgment about your worthiness. It is a coordination mechanism protecting the entire ecosystem of the arrival. This is a profound recontextualization of a deeply familiar pain. The feeling of being passed over, ignored, left behind, or held back is one of the most common and devastating emotional experiences in the human journey. But what if the experience of being held back is not evidence of being held down? What if it is evidence that the architecture of your arrival is more complex than you can see from inside the waiting? Consider how an orchestra tunes before a performance. Not all instruments tune at the same time. There is a sequence. A principal note is offered, and each instrument adjusts itself in relation to that note, one section at a time. To someone outside the process, it sounds like chaos, like everyone is playing different things out of sync without coordination. But the musicians know that this apparent chaos is preparation. It is the final calibration before coherence becomes possible. Your life during a period of delay often feels like the tuning phase of an orchestra. Not everyone around you seems synchronized. Your own instrument may feel slightly off, uncertain, searching for the note it is supposed to hold. But the tuning phase is not the performance. It is the preparation for a performance that will not be possible unless the tuning completes. The law of synchronization also carries within it a concept that this codex calls the threshold of readiness. This threshold is not simply about whether you have worked hard enough or prepared long enough. It is about whether the full interior landscape of your consciousness has aligned with the reality that is preparing to manifest. Your skills may be ready. Your desire may be clear. But your identity, your deepest subconscious assumption about who you are and what you deserve, may still carry a contradiction that would collapse the arrival if it came before that contradiction resolved. The divine detour, in this context, is not just protecting you from an external collision. It is also protecting you from an internal collapse. It is preserving the space in which the interior work can complete itself before the exterior arrival tests its stability. This is why some of the most transformative delays in a person's life are followed by a profound interior shift that seems unrelated to the original desire. During the waiting, something inside reorganized. A belief released itself. An identity updated its frequency. A fear completed its processing and dissolved. And then, almost without announcement, the exterior world rearranged itself to match the new interior landscape. The delay was not the punishment. The delay was the protected space in which the real preparation happened. Every delay you have ever experienced can be re-examined through this law, not with the purpose of making the pain smaller or the waiting more comfortable, but with the purpose of reading what the delay was holding space for. That reading is the beginning of fluency in the language that this codex calls divine timing. The law beneath every delay is this: reality is not indifferent to the quality of your arrival. It is coordinating the conditions of that arrival with an intelligence that operates beyond your personal timeline, beyond your emotional urgency, and beyond the visible surface of events. That coordination sometimes looks like delay. It sometimes feels like obstruction. But inside the delay, if you learn to look for it, is the architecture of something far more precise than anything you could have scheduled for yourself. The misreading begins before the delay even arrives. It begins in the assumption that you already know exactly when something should happen. You set a date, internal or external, conscious or unconscious, and that date becomes the reference point against which all timing is measured. When reality departs from that reference point, the mind immediately classifies the departure as wrong. This is the first and most fundamental layer of the misreading, the belief that your projected timeline is the correct timeline. But that belief was never examined. It was generated from desire, from cultural expectation, from comparison with others, and from impatience dressed as confidence. The timeline you created in your mind was not a map of reality. It was a request. And reality, unlike a customer service department, does not guarantee that every request is fulfilled on the terms in which it was submitted. The second layer of the misreading comes from what this codex calls control addiction. Most people do not think of themselves as control addicts. They think of themselves as responsible, driven, hardworking. They believe that staying in control of outcomes is a sign of competence and maturity. But there is a difference between healthy agency and control addiction. Healthy agency takes action, releases the outcome, and remains open to how the result arrives. Control addiction takes action and then grips the result so tightly that any deviation from the expected path is experienced as catastrophic. Control addiction makes delay intolerable. When you are addicted to control, a delay does not feel like new information. It feels like a theft. Something was supposed to arrive and it did not, and that can only mean that something went wrong. This interpretation shuts down curiosity and activates defense. The moment the mind goes into defense mode around a delay, it stops being able to read the delay as signal. It is too busy fighting it. The third layer of misreading is what happens when impatience is mistaken for urgency. Genuine urgency is a signal from reality that something requires immediate attention or response. It has a specific texture, it is grounded, specific, and action-oriented. Impatience, by contrast, is an internal emotional state generated by the gap between what you want and it is currently present. It has a very different texture. It is diffuse, emotional, and often self-referential. Most people cannot distinguish between these two states when they are inside a delay. The discomfort of waiting feels urgent. The emotional charge of wanting something to arrive generates a sensation that mimics genuine emergency. So people respond to their own impatience as if it were a signal from reality, forcing through delays that were not invitations to push harder, but were invitations to pause, observe, and receive information. There is also a cultural architecture that makes the misreading almost inevitable. The culture you were raised in did not celebrate waiting. It celebrated arrival. It celebrated the announcement, the launch, the promotion, the closing of the deal. The in-between period, the transition, the gestation, the preparation, the delay, was treated as dead time, as something to be minimized, endured, or at best used to prepare for the next achievement. It was never offered as a space that carries its own intelligence. When you have been culturally trained to see waiting as lost time, every delay feels like waste. You are not simply uncomfortable. You are accumulating loss. Each day that passes without arrival is a day of value that has been stolen from you. This interpretation generates resentment, and resentment closes the very receptivity that would allow you to read what the delay is communicating. Another dimension of the misreading is the confusion between delay and abandonment. This is not a cognitive confusion. It is an emotional one, and it runs very deep. Many people carry within their nervous systems an early experience of waiting that was not answered, a need that was not met, a call that was not returned, a presence that did not come. And when a delay occurs in adult life, the nervous system does not always experience it as mere inconvenience. It experiences it as the echo of abandonment. The delay activates an old wound, and through that wound, the delay is interpreted not as timing, but as rejection. This interpretation is deeply understandable and deeply inaccurate. The universe is not your early caretaker. Reality is not abandoning you when it delays your arrival. But the nervous system, once patterned around early experiences of unmet waiting, will consistently misread divine timing as interpersonal rejection. Until that pattern is seen and named, every delay will feel like a referendum on whether you are wanted. The misreading is further compounded by the social visibility of other people's arrivals. You are not waiting in a vacuum. You are waiting inside a world where other people's timelines are constantly visible. Others are launching, landing, arriving, celebrating. And each one of their arrivals, when witnessed from inside your own delay, can feel like evidence that you are specifically behind, specifically excluded, specifically less favored by whatever intelligence governs the distribution of outcomes. This comparison is one of the most effective distortions of timing discernment. It takes your attention away from your own path and its specific coordinates and places it on paths that have entirely different structures, different histories, different interior landscapes, and different convergence requirements. Another person's arrival time tells you nothing about your arrival time, because your arrival is part of an entirely different synchronization field. The misreading also occurs when people mistake the emotional difficulty of waiting for evidence that the wait is wrong. There is an assumption that if the delay were truly protective, it would feel peaceful or at least bearable. If the waiting were truly intelligent, the universe would give you some sign of comfort or confirmation to make the patience easier. But protective delays are not always comfortable. Correction is not always pleasant. Rerouting involves friction, and the discomfort of a divine detour does not cancel its protective function. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the misreading is sustained by the absence of a framework for reading timing as language. Most people have never been taught to ask the kinds of questions that would make a delay legible. They have not been given the tools to distinguish a timing correction from a persistent obstruction, a protective pause from a call to action, a synchronization gap from a failure of preparation. Without those tools, every delay looks the same, and it all looks like failure. This is why this codex exists. Not to tell you that every delay is good, not to encourage passive waiting, but to give you the interpretive framework that transforms delay from a verdict into a vocabulary that reality has always been speaking, a vocabulary that most people, because they were never taught its grammar, have been misreading as punishment every time it tried to protect them. The examples begin with the most visceral form of delay: missed transportation. The train that left without you. The flight you watched through the window as it backed away from the gate. The bus that pulled out of the station just as you turned the corner. These are the delays that arrive without warning, that feel personal, that generate an immediate rush of frustration and helplessness. They are also among the most commonly reported timing events that, in retrospect, reveal a layer of protection that was invisible in the moment. There are accounts, quiet and undramatic, of people who missed a flight and discovered later that the flight they missed encountered severe weather, emergency landings, mechanical difficulties. There are accounts of people who missed trains and found themselves in conversations they could not have had otherwise, conversations that changed the direction of their lives. These are not myths constructed to make delay comfortable. They are patterns that repeat with enough frequency to constitute a signal worth examining. The protection inside missed transportation is not always dramatic. It does not always announce itself with a crisis narrowly avoided. Sometimes the protection is subtler. Sometimes missing a train means arriving at your destination an hour later, which means you enter a room when a specific person is still in it who would have left if you had arrived on schedule. Sometimes missing a flight means spending an unplanned night in a city that offers you a silence, a view, a conversation, or an interior experience that you needed more than you needed to be on time. The mechanism is the same, regardless of the scale of the protection. A timing disruption in your transportation is not the universe being clumsy. It is the system rerouting your position in the coordination field so that your arrival can intersect with what it was supposed to intersect with. The second category of delay that most people recognize is the rescheduled meeting. The call that was supposed to happen and did not. The appointment that moved twice, then 3 times. The email that was promised and never arrived. The decision that was supposed to come on a Friday and came instead on the following Tuesday. Most people experience rescheduled meetings as administrative inconvenience, as evidence of other people's poor organization or disrespect for their time. But a rescheduled meeting, examined carefully, often reveals a coordination mechanism at work. When a meeting is repeatedly rescheduled, the first question most people ask is whether the other party is truly interested. The question this codex asks is different. It asks, what condition must be different on the day this meeting finally occurs compared to the day it was originally scheduled? What has changed in you between the original date and the rescheduled date? What has changed in the other person? What information do you now have that you did not have before? The rescheduling is not always avoidance. Sometimes it is alignment in process. Consider also the delayed payment, the invoice that should have been paid weeks ago, the check that is not cleared, the contract that is stuck in review. For people who are running lean financially, a delayed payment is not a minor inconvenience. It is a source of real anxiety, real disruption, sometimes real hardship. And yet the pattern of delayed payments, examined across many cases, reveals something that is not about money at all. It reveals the state of readiness of both parties involved in the transaction, and sometimes the readiness of what the money is meant to fund. Money that arrives before its recipient is truly ready to steward it often creates more disruption than stability. A financial windfall that arrives before the emotional and practical infrastructure is in place to receive it can be consumed, misdirected, or wasted. The delay in payment, as uncomfortable as it is, sometimes holds space for the interior work of readiness to complete itself. The money arrives when the vessel is prepared for what the money is meant to build. This does not mean financial hardship is always a spiritual preparation. That interpretation would be both cruel and dishonest. There are cases where financial delay is caused by external exploitation, systemic obstruction, or genuine injustice that requires action and advocacy, not metaphysical reframing. This codex will address the difference between genuine divine delay and manufactured obstruction in a later section. But in the absence of those external causes, delayed resources often carry a synchronization signal that rewards examination. The postponed relationship is another archetype of delay that most people carry in their personal history. The person they were certain was meant to be in their life, who did not arrive when they expected. The connection that almost happened but did not, or that was delayed by years of separate paths before it finally converged. The romantic timing that seemed perpetually misaligned, two people who knew each other but were never simultaneously ready for what their connection could become. Postponed relationships are among the most emotionally charged delays that exist, because they involve not just your own timing but the interior timing of another person. They can feel particularly mysterious and particularly painful. When you are ready and the other person is not, or when the timing is right for both of you but the circumstances are not, The delay registers as rejection even when it is not. It registers as unworthiness even when the real mechanism is preparation. There are people who did not meet the person they were meant to build a life with until they had completed a period of significant internal transformation. And that transformation was triggered, at least in part, by the delay. The waiting changed them. The longing reorganized their interior landscape. The years of apparent absence prepared in them a depth of presence that would not have been available if the connection had arrived before it arrived. The delay was not separating them from the relationship. The delay was constructing the version of them that the relationship needed. The blocked launch is a delay that entrepreneurs, creators, and builders know intimately. The project that was ready to go and was stopped by something external. The website that would not go live because of a technical failure. The product that was delayed by a manufacturing problem. The book that could not be released because of a contractual complication. The creative work that hit an unexpected wall right at the moment of release. Blocked launches are particularly frustrating because they occur at the moment of highest momentum. You have done the preparation. You have done the building. You are ready. And then something completely outside your control steps in front of the door. This is where the divine detour mechanism operates most visibly, and also where it is most difficult to accept. Because at the moment of highest investment, being stopped feels most catastrophic. But there are patterns inside blocked launches that reveal the protective mechanism. A product that goes to market before it has been properly tested arrives into the hands of an audience that then forms its first and often permanent impression of that product based on an incomplete version. A creative work that releases before the creator has fully resolved the central question it was meant to answer reaches its audience missing the very thing that would have made it transformative. The delay before a launch is sometimes the final calibration that determines whether the launch is merely an event or whether it becomes a turning point. The slow healing is perhaps the most tender category of delay, when the body takes longer than expected to recover, when the grief does not lift on the schedule that others suggest it should, when the depression that was supposed to respond to treatment takes months longer than the timeline suggested, when the recovery from a broken relationship feels interminably slow compared to how quickly other people seem to move forward. Slow healing is not weakness. It is often specificity. It is the body, the mind, the emotional system taking the precise amount of time that the depth of the wound requires. Rushing healing is not more efficient. It is the beginning of incomplete healing. What does not fully resolve resurfaces. What is suppressed rather than processed returns. The delay inside healing is not failure of the healing process. It is the healing process being thorough. Each of these examples, missed transportation, rescheduled meetings, delayed payments, postponed relationships, blocked launches, slow healing, shares a single underlying structure. In each one, time created a gap between what was expected and what arrived. And inside that gap, something assembled itself that could not have assembled any other way. The gap was not empty. The gap was generative. The divine detour does not always announce itself with drama. It is not always the spectacular collapse of a plan or the unmistakable closing of a door. Sometimes it appears as a persistent, low-grade friction in a specific direction, a subtle but consistent resistance that accumulates over time until the direction itself becomes impossible to sustain. Learning to recognize this resistance early before the full collapse occurs is one of the most valuable forms of timing literacy. The first way the pattern appears is through sudden timing disruptions that feel disproportionate to their cause. You are moving toward something, and then something small but precise breaks down. A tool stops working. A communication fails to transmit. A schedule collapses for reasons that seem disconnected from your intention. The disruption feels absurd in its scale relative to your plan. You were moments away. Everything was in place. And then something trivial, something beneath the dignity of your ambition, stepped in front of it. Pay close attention to these disproportionate disruptions. They are among the clearest signals in the divine detour vocabulary. The smallness of the cause is not evidence of randomness, it is evidence of precision. A small thing placed in exactly the right position can redirect an enormous force. The universe does not always send a wall to stop you. Sometimes it sends a torn bag. The second appearance of the pattern is repeated postponement without a clear external reason. When something keeps not happening despite your consistent effort, despite the apparent cooperation of all visible factors, and despite your genuine readiness, that repetition is a pattern worth reading. Once can be circumstance. Twice can be coincidence. 3 times or more is a signal requesting your attention. Repeated postponement often appears in the final stages before an outcome. The meeting is almost booked, then something prevents it. It is rescheduled, then something prevents it again. The contract is almost signed, then a detail requires revisiting. The conversation that would resolve everything keeps being interrupted before it can complete. This recurring interruption at the threshold is one of the divine detour's most consistent signatures. It appears precisely at the point where forward motion is about to lock into place, which is exactly where a synchronization correction would need to apply its pressure. The third appearance is the experience of an unexpected inner pause. You were ready to act. Your mind was decided. Your plan was clear. And then, without explanation, you simply did not act. Not because of fear or laziness, but because something inside you waited. The action that seemed obvious the day before seemed uncertain the next morning. The certainty dissolved overnight into something that felt more like caution, more like listening, more like waiting for a signal you could not name. This inner pause is easy to dismiss as indecision, but there is a specific quality to a genuine inner pause that distinguishes it from avoidance. An inner pause does not feel like fear. It feels like stillness. It does not feel like confusion. It feels like suspension, as though you are waiting for something to complete before you move. If you have felt this quality of pause and then later discovered that the delay of your action preserved something important, you have already experienced this dimension of the pattern firsthand. Logistical friction is the fourth signature. When the practical machinery of a plan begins to generate unusual resistance, when systems that normally work smoothly begin to malfunction in coordinated ways, when the preparation for something activates an unusual number of complications in sequence, the friction itself is a communication. Not every logistical difficulty is a divine detour. But when the friction is consistent, sequential, and seems to concentrate around a specific outcome or direction, the pattern is worth examining, rather than simply overcoming. The most important and often most overlooked appearance of the divine detour pattern is the later evidence of protection. This is the moment, often months or years after a significant delay, when the full architecture of the protection becomes visible. You see why you could not move forward when you tried. You see what you would have collided with. You see the person or system or circumstance that would have broken something in you that needed to remain intact. You see the version of yourself that was not yet ready and would have misused or mishandled what the delay preserved for a more prepared version. This retrospective visibility is not an accident. It is the pattern completing its cycle of communication. The delay sent its first message when it occurred. It sends its final message when the protection becomes visible in retrospect. Both messages are part of the same transmission. There are also subtler forms of the pattern that appear in the texture of daily life rather than in dramatic disruptions. A series of small misalignments around a specific project. A persistent inability to feel genuine enthusiasm about a direction that looks good on paper. A recurring sense that something is slightly off about a plan, even when you cannot articulate what. A pattern of exhaustion that appears specifically when you try to force a particular outcome, but dissolves when you step back from it. These subtle signals are harder to read because they do not have the clarity of a slammed door or a missed train. They require a different kind of listening, a kind of internal attunement to the specific quality of your own resistance and fatigue, but they are no less precise. In fact, these subtle signals often carry the most important information, because they arrive before the more dramatic corrections become necessary. The pattern also appears collectively, not just individually. Sometimes an entire industry, community, or cultural movement enters a period of delay that affects everyone within it simultaneously. Projects across a field begin to stall. Funding becomes scarce. Launches get postponed across multiple organizations. What appears from the outside as a collective failure of timing is sometimes a collective synchronization pause, a period during which the field itself is reorganizing its architecture before the next era of its expression becomes available. If you have found yourself asking whether the pattern of delay in your life is real or imagined, this is the codex inviting you to look more carefully at its specific texture. Is the delay concentrated in one direction? Does it repeat? Does it generate a particular quality of resistance that feels different from ordinary difficulty? Does it correlate with a specific season of your internal landscape? These questions are the beginning of diagnostic fluency. Write the word delayed in the comments if you have ever experienced a disruption in timing that you later understood was protecting you. You do not need to explain the full story. One word is enough. This codex is a living archive, and your signal has a place within it. A delay is never simply about time. It is also always about the interior landscape of the person experiencing the delay. What the delay reveals about you is not a judgment, it is a map. And that map, read with honesty and precision, is one of the most valuable pieces of information you will ever access. The first thing a delay reveals is the depth of your control orientation. Specifically, it reveals how much of your sense of safety depends on outcomes arriving when and how you expect them to. When a delay creates disproportionate anxiety, when waiting makes you feel fundamentally unsafe or threatened, that disproportionality is information. It is telling you that somewhere in your interior architecture, your sense of stability is tethered not to who you are, but to what arrives. When the arrival is delayed, the tether pulls. And what you feel is not simply inconvenience. It is an existential threat to the identity that was waiting to be confirmed by the outcome. This is one of the most important revelations a delay can offer. If your inner stability depends on the outcome arriving on schedule, then your inner stability is not actually stable. It is contingent. It is rented, not owned. The delay is not creating your anxiety. It is revealing the structure that was already there, waiting to be exposed. The second revelation concerns urgency addiction. There is a specific way that chronic urgency operates in a person's life. It manufactures a sense of momentum that feels productive but is actually driven by anxiety, always rushing toward the next thing, always behind on something, always operating from the feeling that there is not enough time, not enough space, not enough stillness. People who are urgency addicted find delay intolerable, not because the delay is genuinely harmful, but because stillness itself is threatening to them. When stillness threatens, it is because something lives in the stillness that has not yet been faced. The delay forces a confrontation with that something. It removes the motion that was serving as distraction. It creates the very spaciousness that urgency addiction is designed to prevent. And so the delay feels like an attack, not because it is removing your opportunity, but because it is removing your escape. The third revelation is about mistrust. Specifically, it reveals the depth of your mistrust of the intelligence operating beneath events. Mistrust is not always conscious. It often presents as pragmatism, as realism, as the responsible refusal to depend on anything that cannot be verified, scheduled, and controlled. But beneath that pragmatism often lies a history that made trust feel dangerous. A history in which waiting was not answered, in which hope was disappointed, in which life did not follow through on its apparent promises. When delay activates deep mistrust, the delay itself has become secondary to the wound. The waiting has triggered an older story about unreliability, abandonment, or the capriciousness of forces outside your control. Recognizing this is not about fixing the wound in this moment. It is about distinguishing the historical pattern from the current timing event so that the old story does not override the present signal. The fourth revelation concerns the fear of missing out. This is not the shallow social media version of fear of missing out. This is a deeper architectural version. The fear that reality is distributing finite opportunities and that if your slot is taken, another will not appear. The fear that timing is a competition in which the delayed are losing and the promptly arrived are winning. The fear that there is a closing window and you are not inside it. This fear is one of the most common generators of the misreading of delay. Because if you believe that opportunity is finite and your window is closing, delay cannot be protective. It can only be catastrophic. Every moment of waiting is a moment of loss. Every postponement is a theft from a limited supply. But if you begin to understand that the intelligence governing timing is not distributing from a finite supply, but rather assembling from an infinite coordination field, the fear of missing out loses much of its grip. The fifth revelation is about the relationship between identity and outcome. Specifically, it reveals how much of your current identity is contingent on a specific outcome arriving. You've told yourself a story about who you will be when the delay resolves. When the money arrives, you will be financially free. When the relationship arrives, you will be complete. When the career breakthrough arrives, you will be worthy of respect. When the healing completes, you will be safe inside your own body. These are not merely desires, they are deferred identities, and the delay is disrupting the timeline of the identity, not just the timeline of the outcome. This is why delays feel so personal, because they are personal. They are touching not just what you want, but who you are waiting to become. The codex asks whether the identity can be assumed now, before the outcome arrives, as a prerequisite rather than a reward. The sixth revelation is about attachment to a specific form. Most people desire a specific outcome, but they are even more attached to the specific form in which they believe the outcome must arrive. The relationship must look a certain way. The money must come from a particular source. The healing must follow a specific path. The recognition must come from a particular audience. And so when reality begins to deliver the essence of what was desired, but through a different form, through a different door, on a different schedule, it is not recognized as delivery. It is experienced as delay or even as failure. The divine detour often routes around the specific form to which you are attached in order to deliver the essence through a form that is actually more aligned with your full trajectory. The delay is often not a delay in the arrival of the essence. It is a delay in the arrival of the form you specified. And the gap between those two things is where the revelation lives. The seventh revelation is perhaps the quietest and most important. It is about your current relationship with the present moment. A delay, by its nature, redirects attention from the future back to the present. It says, "You are not there yet. You are here." And what you do with here, the quality of attention you bring to the present as you wait, reveals the true state of your inner life with a precision that nothing else can match. If the present, when the future is temporarily inaccessible, feels empty, meaningless, or unbearable, that emptiness is not caused by the delay. The delay has simply removed the forward motion that was filling the space where presence should be. The delay is asking you, who are you when nothing is arriving? Can you be full in the absence of forward motion? Can you find meaning in the middle of a pause? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the most precise diagnostic questions that the architecture of delay ever asks. Not every delay is a divine detour. This is one of the most important distinctions this codex carries, and it must be stated clearly and without softening. The divine detour framework, misapplied, becomes one of the most sophisticated forms of avoidance ever assembled. If every delay is automatically reframed as protection, then the framework becomes a shelter for procrastination, fear, poor preparation, and the refusal to take difficult but necessary action. The first false signal to examine is delay generated by procrastination. Procrastination has a specific signature that distinguishes it from divine timing. It tends to concentrate around tasks or directions that require facing something uncomfortable. The discomfort is not the signal of a wrong path. The discomfort is the natural resistance that accompanies growth, challenge, and the edges of your current capacity. Procrastination masquerades as discernment by generating a sense that the timing is not right, that you need more preparation, that something must be different before you can act. The distinction between procrastination and divine timing is not always immediately obvious, but there are markers. Procrastination tends to be selective. It targets the specific action that requires courage or exposure, while leaving comfortable activities undisturbed. Divine timing tends to affect the broader ecosystem around a direction, creating friction across multiple touch points rather than just the one that requires the most courage. The second distortion is delay generated by poor planning or inadequate preparation. If a project stalls because the foundational work was not done, if a relationship struggles because the communication skills to sustain it were never developed, if a financial goal remains out of reach because the practical systems that support it are absent, These delays are not divine detours. They are feedback from the gap between your current capacity and the requirements of the desired outcome. This form of delay calls not for receptivity, but for skill development, for practical preparation, for the honest assessment of what is missing and the disciplined effort to build it. Reading this kind of delay as divine protection is not only inaccurate, it is also a disservice to the self, because it replaces an invitation to grow with an excuse to remain at the current level. The third distortion is delay generated by avoidance. Avoidance is different from procrastination in that it is driven not simply by discomfort, but by fear. It is the systematic rerouting of attention away from something that the self has decided, consciously or unconsciously, is too threatening to approach. Avoidance often presents as wisdom. It tells you that the thing you are avoiding is not right for you, that you are not called to it, that your hesitation is intuition. But avoidance has a texture that intuition does not share. Genuine intuition is calm. It does not escalate. It does not generate the specific kind of tension that comes from suppression. It does not require you to maintain a story about why you are not doing the thing you are avoiding. Avoidance, by contrast, carries an undertow. It requires ongoing maintenance. The story of why you are not acting must be continually reinforced because the suppressed call keeps resurfacing. If you find yourself constructing increasingly elaborate reasons for why the timing is not right for a specific direction, examine whether the architecture of that reasoning serves discernment or avoidance. The fourth distortion is the use of timing as an excuse for a lack of accountability. This is subtle but important. The divine detour framework can be co-opted by a part of the self that does not wish to take responsibility for the consequences of choices already made. If a project failed because of genuine strategic errors, reframing that failure as a divine detour delays the learning that would actually change the outcome the next time. If a relationship broke down because of behavioral patterns that were never addressed, calling the breakup a timing misalignment prevents the insight that would make the next relationship different. Accountability and spiritual discernment are not enemies. Accountability is, in fact, one of the deepest forms of discernment. It asks not only what reality was doing to me in this situation, but also what I was doing to this situation that contributed to the outcome. The divine detour framework must always be held in one hand while accountability is held in the other. The fifth distortion is superstition. When a person is operating from superstition rather than discernment, they are applying symbolic meaning to events without examination, without calibration, without the grounded inquiry that separates signal from projection. A flight that was canceled does not automatically mean you were not supposed to make the trip. A payment that was delayed does not automatically mean the financial opportunity is wrong. A relationship that had difficulty does not automatically mean it should be surrendered. Superstition uses the surface appearance of a delay as its entire evidence base. Discernment uses the delay as the beginning of a set of questions rather than as a conclusion. The difference between these two approaches is not small. One produces a life driven by the arbitrary interpretation of random events. The other produces a life in which reality becomes an increasingly legible and trustworthy source of guidance. The sixth distortion is the habit of demanding a sign as a substitute for decision-making. There are people who, when facing a difficult decision, do not consult their values, their discernment, or their practical assessment of the situation. They wait for a sign, and then they interpret whatever arrives next as the sign they were waiting for, regardless of its actual relevance to the decision at hand. This is not spiritual literacy. This is magical thinking, and it can lead to decisions that are anchored not in aligned wisdom, but in the superstitious interpretation of coincidence. The framework this codex offers does not encourage the passive waiting for signs. It teaches the active reading of patterns that are already present. These are very different practices. One surrenders agency to random events. The other exercises a refined form of agency that includes the ability to read the information that reality offers, alongside the information that reason, experience, and values offer. The practice begins before the delay fully arrives. It begins in the moment you notice that a timing disruption has occurred, that something expected did not arrive as scheduled, that the forward motion of a specific intention has been interrupted. That first moment of noticing is where the divine detour protocol begins, and it begins with a single instruction: stop before you react. This first step sounds simple. It is not. The impulse to react to a delay is one of the fastest and most automatic responses in the human nervous system. It is wired by conditioning, by urgency addiction, by the cultural equation of delay with failure. The impulse to immediately push back, to immediately diagnose, to immediately fix or force or find the workaround, arrives before the mind has had any time to assess the situation with clarity. The practice of stopping before reacting is not passivity. It is the creation of a space between the event and your response to the event. That space is where discernment lives. Without that space, you are not responding to the delay. You are reacting to the emotional state the delay triggered, and an emotional reaction, no matter how energetically it is pursued, will not tell you what the delay is carrying. Stopping takes a specific form within this protocol. It means physically slowing down. It means taking at least 3 conscious breaths before speaking, typing, calling, or deciding. It means introducing a pause whose explicit purpose is to allow the initial emotional charge to move through without becoming a decision. You are not suppressing the emotion. You are letting it complete its passage before you engage your discernment. Once you have stopped and created the space, the second step of the protocol is identification. You are asking a single question: what kind of delay is this? This is not a question about the cause of the delay at the surface level. You may not know the surface cause yet. This is a question about the quality and texture of the delay as you experience it. There are several qualities to examine in this identification step. First, is this delay sudden and unexpected, or has it been building gradually through accumulated friction? A sudden disruption has a different quality than a pattern of progressive resistance. A sudden disruption often signals an immediate correction or protection. A pattern of progressive resistance often signals a deeper misalignment that has been communicating through smaller signals before the larger disruption arrived. Second, is the delay isolated to a specific direction, or does it affect multiple areas of your life simultaneously? A delay that is specific to one direction often carries specific information about that direction. A delay that affects multiple areas simultaneously may signal a broader period of internal reorganization that requires you to be still across the full field of your life rather than focused on any single outcome. Third, what is the quality of your body's response to this delay? The body is one of the most precise timing instruments available to you, and most people do not consult it. When a divine detour is occurring, the body often responds with a specific quality of release beneath the surface of the frustration. There's a kind of deep breath that the body takes when a delay has prevented something that would have been genuinely harmful. It is subtle. It can be overridden by the mind's urgency. But if you learn to listen for it, it is one of the most reliable signals in the divine detour vocabulary. The third step of the protocol is the protection or synchronization inquiry. This is the question that sits at the heart of the divine detour protocol, and it asks, is this delay protecting me from something, or is it synchronizing the conditions of my arrival? Both are legitimate divine detour functions, but they call for different responses. A protective delay requires you to stop fully. It is saying that forward motion in this direction at this time would lead you into something harmful, incomplete, or misaligned. A protective delay often comes with a quality of warning, a sense that something is not right that you could not articulate before the delay made it visible. When a delay feels protective, the appropriate response is receptivity. You are receiving information about what you are being steered away from. Your role is to receive that information rather than to dismantle the protection. A synchronization delay requires you to pause, not stop. It is saying that the conditions of your arrival are not yet fully assembled, and that your continued motion forward would produce a premature or incomplete outcome. A synchronization delay often comes with a quality of patience rather than warning. It does not feel like a red light. It feels more like a yellow one. The direction is not wrong. The timing is not yet complete. When a delay feels like synchronization, the appropriate response is continued preparation, combined with a relaxed receptivity to the signal that completion is approaching. The fourth step of the protocol is the body check. This has already been introduced, but it merits its own distinct instruction. The body check is a deliberate consultation of your physical experience as a source of information about the delay. You are not asking the body to explain the delay. You are asking the body to tell you whether the delay generates a quality of fear or a quality of release beneath the surface emotion. Fear, when examined carefully in the body, tends to generate a specific contraction, a tightening in the chest, a constriction in the throat, a sensation of closing. This kind of fear, when associated with a delay, often indicates that the delay is activating an old pattern, a historical response to waiting rather than a present signal from the timing field. Release, by contrast, often presents as a subtle softening, an almost imperceptible opening, even when the surface experience is still one of frustration or disappointment. Release beneath frustration is one of the body's most precise signals that a delay is protective. The fifth step is the observation of repeated timing signals. A single delay is a data point. A pattern of delays is a message. Within the divine detour protocol, you are asked to broaden your gaze from the single event to the pattern across multiple events. Have you experienced delays in this specific direction before? Have you noticed a consistent quality of friction in this area of your life? Has the same kind of obstruction appeared at the same stage of a process multiple times? When a timing pattern repeats, it is communicating with a kind of emphasis. It is not simply offering information, it is insisting on being heard. Repeated timing signals require more sustained attention than a single delay. They require you to sit with the pattern long enough to identify what it consistently precedes, what it consistently prevents, and what consistently changes in you or in your circumstances during the period of the pattern. The sixth step is the action adjustment. This step is critical. because it is where the divine detour protocol avoids becoming a philosophy of passivity. After you have stopped, identified, inquired about protection or synchronization, check the body and observe the pattern, you adjust your action. Not abandon it. Adjust it. Adjustment might mean redirecting the same energy toward a different aspect of your intention that is not currently experiencing resistance. It might mean using the period of delay to deepen the preparation for the arrival that is coming. It might mean shifting your attention from the outcome that is delayed to the interior condition that the delay is inviting you to address. It might mean seeking more information, more alignment, or more clarity before the next attempt to move forward. The adjustment step is where the protocol becomes practical and disciplined. It is where you take everything you have gathered from the preceding steps and translate it into intentional action. Action that is informed by the signal of the delay rather than merely fighting against it. The seventh and final step of the divine detour protocol is the cultivation of what this codex calls active receptivity. This is a specific quality of attention that is neither passive waiting nor forceful pushing. It is the alert, grounded, open state of a person who knows that something is assembling itself on their behalf and who remains fully present and engaged with their life while that assembly completes. Active receptivity means continuing to show up in your life with full presence and effort while releasing the grip on the specific form and timing of the outcome. It means being available to the unexpected arrival of the thing you sought through doors you did not specify, on a schedule you did not design. It means holding your intention clearly while holding your attachment to its form lightly. This is not easy, but it is the final signature of someone who has truly learned to read the language of divine timing. The first and most dangerous mistake is the one that stands at the opposite end of the spectrum from this codex's teaching, forcing through every delay as a matter of principle. There is a belief, particularly common among high achievers and people who have used discipline as their primary tool for navigating difficulty, that the appropriate response to any obstruction is to push harder. That delay is merely resistance to be overcome, that the person who pushes through every obstacle is the person who wins. This approach produces results in certain domains. Raw persistence does overcome certain kinds of resistance, but it also produces something else that is less often examined: the accumulation of outcomes that arrived through force and therefore arrived incomplete. Relationships that were pursued past a signal to pause and became controlling. Projects that were launched through resistance and entered the market before they were ready. Decisions that were forced past a protective hesitation and created consequences that a brief pause would have prevented. The mistake is not action. The mistake is the refusal to distinguish between resistance that calls for persistence and resistance that calls for discernment. When every delay is treated as an obstacle to be forced, the ability to read delay as signal is permanently disabled. And without that ability, you are navigating by momentum alone, which means that every divine detour becomes a collision. The second mistake is the opposite extreme, becoming passive and interpreting every difficulty as a sign to stop. This is the misapplication of the divine detour framework that converts a precision instrument into a comfortable excuse. When a person begins to use the divine detour interpretation to avoid every uncomfortable action, every risk, every form of effort that generates friction, the framework has been corrupted. It is no longer serving discernment, it is serving avoidance. The signal of this corruption is specific. When the divine detour interpretation is consistently applied to the directions that require courage and never to the directions that are comfortable, the application is not discernment. It is preference dressed as spirituality. A true divine detour can occur in a comfortable direction as easily as in an uncomfortable one. If the delays in your life are always in the directions that scare you, examine whether you are reading timing or simply avoiding growth. The third mistake is using delay as an excuse for lack of preparation. There are delays that are genuine signals from the timing field, and there are delays that are the predictable result of approaching an outcome without the preparation it requires. Confusing the two produces a specific kind of stagnation where the person waits for the timing to be right without doing the preparation that is actually what is required. The timing will not deliver a result that the absence of preparation makes impossible. The delay in this case is not protection. It is feedback. Preparation is not the enemy of trust. Preparation is often the most precise response to a synchronization delay. The codex does not ask you to wait passively for the universe to deliver your outcome. It asks you to use the delay to build what the outcome will require of you when it arrives. The mistake is sitting in the delay without using the delay. The intelligence of timing has created space. What you build in that space will determine what you are ready for when the space closes. The fourth mistake is demanding immediate explanation from the delay. This is one of the most common and most understandable errors in the navigation of divine timing. You want to know why. You want the reason. You want the universe to show you right now what this delay is preventing and what it is preparing. And when that explanation does not come immediately, the absence of explanation becomes its own source of suffering. But the intelligence of timing does not operate on the same timeline as the demand for explanation. The why of a delay is often not available until the protection has completed its function. Demanding the explanation before the function is complete is like demanding to see the finished building before the foundation has been poured. The demand will not produce the explanation. It will only produce more frustration. The fifth mistake is performing receptivity while maintaining hidden resistance. This is one of the subtlest corruptions of the protocol. A person learns the language of divine timing. They speak about trusting the process, about reading the signals, about receptivity and surrender. But beneath the language, they are still gripping the outcome, still calculating how to force the result while appearing to wait, still running the urgency machinery quietly behind the visible posture of trust. Performed receptivity is not receptivity. Reality is not fooled by the correct language in the presence of a contradicting internal state. The subconscious, which is the medium through which your reality is assembled, responds to what you actually believe, not to what you say you believe. If you are performing patience while internally raging against the delay, the performance does not change the signal you are transmitting. Only an honest relationship with your own interior state can produce the genuine receptivity that true divine timing requires. The sixth mistake is comparing your timing to another person's and drawing conclusions about the meaning of your delay from that comparison. Another person's arrival time is not evidence about your arrival time. Their timeline is calibrated to their specific interior landscape, their specific convergence requirements, their specific preparation, and their specific karmic and synchronization field. None of that is yours. Their timing tells you nothing true about your timing, and using their arrival as a reference point for your delay will produce interpretations that are consistently inaccurate and consistently painful. The seventh mistake is abandoning a genuine direction because a delay made it feel hopeless. There is a critical difference between a delay that is asking you to stop and a delay that is asking you to wait. Both involve a halt in forward motion, but they have different signatures and they call for different responses. The mistake is treating every halt as a permanent verdict. When a delay feels final, examine whether that finality is coming from the signal or from the emotional weight of the accumulated waiting. Sometimes the most precisely timed arrivals in a person's life come immediately after the moment they nearly concluded that the direction was wrong. In the domain of relationships, delay discernment operates with a particular delicacy because the timing of another person is never fully within your sight. When a relationship stalls, when a connection that seemed destined does not open, when the person you hope to build something with is not arriving on your expected schedule, the divine detour framework asks you to consider a possibility that is not comfortable, that the stall may be serving not just your preparation, but the preparation of the other person. This does not mean that every stalled relationship is simply waiting for the right timing. Some connections are not delayed arrivals. Some are genuinely complete in what they offered, and the stall is the timing field, signaling a natural conclusion rather than a preparation for continuation. The discernment required in relationships is therefore particularly nuanced. It asks, is this a synchronization delay or is this a completion signal? And it asks whether you are willing to sit with that question honestly without forcing it in either direction. In the domain of money and financial timing, the divine detour principle surfaces in the patterns of when resources arrive and what they are ready to support when they arrive. Financial delays, as previously discussed, are not always protection in the dramatic sense, but they frequently carry a synchronization function that becomes visible only when the money finally does arrive. If you examine the periods before significant financial openings in your life, you will often find that the delay was assembled alongside an internal shift, a new understanding of how to manage resources, a new relationship to value, a new clarity about what the money was for. In career and creative work, the divine detour appears most visibly in the gap between readiness and recognition. You are ready. Your work is ready. And still the recognition does not arrive. This gap is one of the most challenging delays that creative and professional life produces because it implicates not just your timing, but your worthiness. The delay feels like a judgment about quality rather than a signal about synchronization. But recognition, in almost every domain of creative and professional life, is a convergence event. It requires not just the quality of your work, but the readiness of the audience, the availability of the infrastructure, and the cultural moment in which the work can be received. These factors are not within your control. They assemble themselves according to their own coordination logic, and the delay between readiness and recognition is frequently the period during which that assembly is completing itself. In the domain of spiritual timing and personal transformation, the divine detour operates most profoundly and most invisibly. There are periods of spiritual life that feel like nothing is moving, like the interior journey has stalled, like the growth that was happening has suddenly plateaued into a gray, unchanging landscape. These spiritual pauses are among the most disorienting delays that exist because they are not about any external outcome. They are about the interior itself. Spiritual pauses are often not stalls, they are integrations. After a period of rapid interior movement, of insight, of expanded awareness, the interior landscape requires a period of stabilization before the next expansion can occur. Pushing through a spiritual pause, demanding continued expansion, mistaking the integration period for regression, is one of the most common ways that a genuine spiritual unfolding is interrupted before it can complete. In the domain of major life transitions, which include relocation, life structure change, vocation change, and the dissolution of significant relationships, the divine detour operates across much longer time horizons. These transitions rarely resolve on a single timeline. They unfold in stages, each of which has its own readiness requirement and its own synchronization logic. The mistake in navigating major transitions is attempting to force all stages to resolve simultaneously, to rush the ending while simultaneously demanding the new beginning. The divine detour in major transitions often manifests as the simultaneous stall of both the ending and the beginning. The old structure has not fully dissolved, the new structure has not yet fully appeared, and the person is suspended between them in what some traditions have called the liminal space. This suspension is not a mistake. It is the gap in which the full reorganization of identity can occur. Learning to inhabit the liminal space without forcing either a premature return to the old or a premature lunge into the new is one of the most advanced applications of delayed discernment. In every domain, the advanced application of divine detour discernment returns to a single principle. Reality is coordinating your arrival with more variables than you can see. Your role is not to manage all those variables. Your role is to maintain the quality of your interior state, the clarity of your intention, the honesty of your preparation, and the depth of your receptivity while the coordination completes. The divine detour is not asking you to abandon the wheel. It is asking you to trust that there are hands on the wheel you cannot see and to drive accordingly. Return to the train station, the man with the torn bag, papers scattered across the floor, strangers stepping around him, the train pulling away without him. Hold that image for a moment, not as a story about misfortune, as a map. Because here is what the codex has built for you in the time since you first entered that scene. You now understand that the torn bag was not a failure of preparation. The scattering papers were not evidence that the path was wrong. The closing doors were not a verdict. They were the first movement in a rerouting whose full architecture the man on the floor could not yet see. He was not being left behind. He was being redirected to a more precise timing coordinate. This is not a comfortable truth in the moment of the torn bag. The floor is cold. The strangers are indifferent. The schedule has broken. And the gap between what was supposed to happen and what is happening contains a specific quality of humiliation, of helplessness, of the terrible suspension that comes when your plan collides with a reality that will not cooperate. But inside that collision, if you have received what this codex was built to transmit, something different is now available to you. You now have a framework for that moment. You have a question to ask instead of only a reaction to feel. You have a protocol to engage instead of only a force to exert. You have, for the first time, or perhaps for the first time in language you recognize, the beginning of fluency in the language that reality has been speaking to you your entire life through every door that closed early, every plan that did not hold, every timing disruption that felt like abandonment and was, in fact, something far more precise. The man in the station eventually left the platform. He did not know what the next train would carry. He did not know who he would meet, what he would see, what the hour of delay would construct in the invisible architecture of his path. He only knew that the train had gone and that he was still there. And perhaps somewhere in the hour that followed, a thought arrived that was not available to him when the doors were still open, that the missed train was not the end of the route. It was the beginning of accurate timing. That is the final message of this codex. Not that every delay is comfortable, not that every closed door conceals something better, not that waiting is always wise or that forcing is always wrong. The message is more precise than that. The message is that reality is a coordination field, and delay is sometimes how that field communicates. That time carries intelligence, and its intelligence does not always explain itself in the moment it operates. That you can become literate in this language. That literacy changes not only how you read a delay, but how you inhabit your entire life. More slowly, more truthfully, more aligned with the intelligence that has been trying to protect you for longer than you knew it was speaking. If this codex arrived at the right time, keep it close. Return to it when the next torn bag moment finds you on the floor of a station you did not plan to stand in. It will remind you that you are not behind. You are being routed with a precision that only becomes visible to the ones who learn to read it.